So Fujifilm has sent me some gear over the past couple months, and whether it be the X-T4, the 80mm f2.8, no matter what it is, I've been overly impressed with a lot of the things that have come into my hands. Now, some of these lenses I've already tried, I've already owned, I've already sold. Some of the camera bodies I've already tried myself as well. But there is one lens that for the first time I finally got in my hands, and I can say it's one of the most impressive lenses that I've ever actually used, and that would be the Fujifilm 50mm f1.0. But there is one issue with this lens, and it is the fact that for me, I would never buy this. So the XF 50mm 1.0 is a fantastic chunk of a lens. Compared to Fujifilm lenses, this thing is magnificently magnificent and large. It's got a huge front element compared to other Fujifilm lenses. This one is a 77mm filter thread. It comes with a nice, amazingly snappy lens hood, which if you guys know Fujifilm lenses, the lens hood department and those things actually being snappy and sticking on there have not been the best ever historically. And it's got a nice aperture ring, of course, you expect from Fujifilm. Now, of course, if you're one of those people that worry, oh, will it move if I'm doing things? It won't. Just like any other Fujifilm lens, it's not really that sloppy. I do have an issue with the focusing ring for manual focus, but again, if you're using this, you're not really worried about manual focus. A couple things to say about this lens. This is by far potentially the sharpest Fujifilm lens ever. Of course, the 50-140 has a special place where everyone kind of regards it as a sharp lens, but then again, I feel like everyone always says that XYZ lens is the sharpest Fujifilm lens. They're all sharp. They're all really good lenses. Fujifilm has done a great job of historically creating amazing glass. But this one is just a different kind of sharp. When I talk about me using this for portraits, whether it be for personal ones or for some portraits never actually went and I compared all these lenses, this is a lens that stands out because not only are you getting TAC sharpness even at 1.0, but the micro contrast is so impressive that whenever you're taking these shallow depth of field portraits, and yes, only the eyes in focus, which I have a problem with, but there's so much detail in the rest of the skin as far as where it's breathing. I don't want to say it's medium format like, but there is so much detail that to someone looking at the image, they wouldn't be able to tell that if your subject is facing right shoulder forward, left shoulder back, and looking through to the camera, you wouldn't really be able to tell that they're too much out of focus on the forward shoulder and the back shoulder for the simple fact of how much detail is still in there due to micro contrast and the fact that the fall off is so beautiful on this lens. I can tell you right now, this is one of the greatest lenses for just smoothness of the fall off on this lens. Now, it's not like a 35 1.4 where the fall off is smooth because it's a sloppy copy, where it's a sloppy copy as the way I would say it, to where it's kind of got a funky quirkiness to it, to where it looks like light wraps around it. The fall off in this is actually just beautiful because of just the way the image renders with all that micro contrast. Now, that being said, and all the positives of it, which, you know, of course, there's a sharpness, there's the 1.0 aperture, which will make it great for low light situations. For whenever it comes to video, I'm sure this is going to be just fantastic because Fujifilm cameras are getting upgraded with the new processors, and every lens is great. This video right now is being recorded on the Fujifilm 35mm 1.4, which a lot of people says is one of the worst lenses when it comes to autofocus, and it's not making any noise. So this will do more than enough whenever it comes to being used for video. But there are 3 reasons why I wouldn't buy this lens. And again, let me preface this by saying that this may be Fujifilm's greatest creation of all time. As the light goes down, and again, I apologize, I can't control what the outside does. This may be Fujifilm's greatest accomplishment of all time when it comes to a lens. That is a very serious statement because this has the micro contrast, this has the look and the sharpness from edge to edge that I've only seen in the Canon 50mm f1.2, which to me is one of the greatest lenses that you can get on any kind of mirrorless system, Leica included. So this lens actually is very special. They did do something amazing with this. This may just be like Fujifilm's best lens, period. But it's not one that I would ever purchase, and there's 3 exact reasons for it. And I'll start off with number 1. And number 1 is, to quote my mentor, Flossie Carter, the price is too goddamn high. For this lens right here, from the lowest that I've seen it being able to purchase at $13.99, it's a fantastic lens, but it is a very niche kind of lens. If you're not shooting portraits, this is too short for any kind of sports photography, and even more, this is too long for any kind of in the weeds kind of event photography. Now, I know they release the 18mm f1.4, which is technically just as sharp as this, and I know they're going to release a 56 1.2 copy, which can technically be as sharp as this, and so on and so forth. But it just needs to be noted that this is a very niche lens. If you're not someone who's shooting primarily portraits only, this is not a lens that's going to stick on your body 24/7. And because of that, I can't really justify that price. Now, if this lens was maybe around $1,100, $1,200, $1,000, I would completely understand that. But for the fact that Fujifilm, I believe, has other 77mm filter thread lenses that are running sometimes lower than this, and the fact that even though this lens is a nice 1.0, and it's nice and heavy, that we've seen, you know, from, again, this lens is cheaper than some of the competitors and what they have, but we've seen Fujifilm have just as sharp as optics and lenses that are smaller. I can't really say that just because it's bigger, it justifies the weight. Part of me is also questioning whether, or justifies the price. And part of me is also wondering if, did Fujifilm have to make the lens this big to get the 1.0 aperture? Or was it something of they wanted to give something to the professionals who demand that they have gigantic lenses and gigantic bodies so that they can look the part, something to play with? And so the price is too goddamn high whenever you consider you can get a 90mm f2, which, as I did in the comparisons, shoot images that actually look very similar to this lens at 1.2 and 1.4. The fact that the 56 1.2, that 0.2 difference of the aperture isn't really that noticeable, and that is actually closer to the 85mm focal length, and again, is also niche. And when it comes to the fact that with these cameras, the X-T2 I'm using right now with the firmware updates, the X-T4 of course, and my X Pro 3 with the firmware updates because of new processors and the X-Trans 4 sensor, the 56 1.2 can actually do just as well as the 50mm 1.0 does when it comes to autofocus. I can't really say that I could justify buying this over that 56 1.2. If you're buying this over the 56 1.2, it's because you just have to have the best of Fujifilm's best, and you have to have this in your kit. Now again, this has a certain actual character and look to it. This isn't like the anything else Fujifilm's done where they just make a super sharp lens like the F2s. This has a little bit of character and a little bit of difference to it and a nice song and dance to it. But if I'm being honest, the price is too goddamn high for a lens like this, especially considering that Fujifilm just looks like they're wanting to make larger lenses to appease a whole different crowd than the ones who have been faithful to them. The second reason why me personally I would not buy this lens is the weight. It's the size, it's just the build of it. It literally is the fact that this is just a huge lens. There's a reason why this wouldn't be a lens that I would grab and use 90% of the time, and it's because it's too damn big for 90% of things I'm doing. For example, if I'm shooting street photography, this lens is too big. This is too big. This is going to be noticed. The 90mm f2 isn't even this big. This is a lens that's going to get noticed. And if you're someone who's shooting street and you want a small camera on you, this isn't one that you're going to grab. If you're shooting weddings, there's also an issue I have with this is for some situations, this may not be as telephoto as you need, as longer reach as you need in order to shoot certain things in a wedding. Because of this, you're going to be relying on a 70 to 200, you're going to be relying on a 90mm f2, an 80mm f2.8, a 100 to 200, a 200mm f2. You're going to be relying on those instead of this, which goes to say, are these only for first look portraits? Are these only for after wedding portraits? Are these only for pre-ceremony? And because of that, there's not much benefit when it comes to the size with it. So you have this big lens that looks the part and it looks super hefty, but when it comes to use application, it's just not there. Again, it's heavy. It's not one that I really would want to carry around, and even more, I came to Fujifilm over switching back to Micro Four Thirds when I left full frame and Sony APS-C because the lenses were not only great, but they were small and they were compact and I could carry them. And they have lenses like as a bug flies on or into my eye. They have lenses, that was weird, like the, I don't know if I can get a replay of that. They have lenses like the 35 1.4, which is a 50mm effective focal length that I can basically use anywhere and that I love to use anywhere. So the size and the weight is kind of an issue for me, and why this, I wouldn't choose this over a 56 1.2, a 35 1.4, a 90mm f2, etc, etc. The last reason why this is a lens that I would not buy, and again, when I tell you I'm not buying, it also means I'm not recommending it, is for the simple fact that I alluded to earlier with the weddings, with the street photography, everything like that, with the receptions. This is not a lens that you're going to have on your camera or want on your camera for a lot of use cases. Now, there are going to be people that say, hey, I've used this at receptions, I've used this in XYZ, and that's great, that's fantastic. But for me specifically, I'm right now transitioning into more of a documentary type of sports photography, of extreme action, things like that. When it comes to PBR and ABBI, and a documentary called The Road to the 702, following these bullmen and bull riders, as well as some work with San Antonio FC, the San Antonio Missions for MILB, potentially the San Antonio Spurs, and hopefully the Dallas Cowboys, or something that I'm trying to reach. I have connections, so you guys be in faith with me on that. But this is not a lens that I would bring. Sure, pre-game warm-ups, whenever you're allowed to be on the field, be closer to people, if you're interviewing someone, if you're getting a portrait of a coach, if you're getting a portrait of someone. Sure, with weddings, with getting photos of the details of everything around them, of detail shots of before, of getting a scene and everything, this is a great lens. But there comes a point to where around 75mm is not enough. And for the lens that I'm getting and the amount that I'm paying, the fact that this can't stay on a body full time kind of upsets me. And even more, let's say for example the wedding ceremony. I don't know if I want a 75mm and a 70-200 or a 90 f2 effective a focal length of 135. And this on two separate bodies. I think I'd want a 16-35 or an 18-1.4, sorry, a 16-55 or an 18-1.4. You can tell I use shoot Canon and Sony full frame, or along with those longer telephoto lengths, because this can't reach. That's me just thinking from a former wedding photographer standpoint. This just seems like a lens that, no offense, and of course my boy Jason Kiefer, you can respond down in the comments and let me know how you use this, but this is just a lens that I feel like would be very tricky for me to use. And I would kind of have to plan my kit for a ceremony and plan my kit when it comes to just basically a reception around this lens and how I'm going to use it. And it's not something necessarily that I would like to do. I would more prefer two lenses that I know are my go-tos than having to plan around using this one, because it is such a nice lens that I feel bad leaving it out. The other thing is, again, street photography. This isn't a lens that I would ever use in street photography, not even because it's super noticeable. Let's be honest, it's just a heavy ass weighty lens, and having this on a strap or this on a sling isn't going to be super duper fun. I can see this as a lens that I would love to have on sidelines or pre-games for whenever it comes to sport photography, but even more, this is a lens that I would never use in a sports photography situation, unfortunately, because I'm either going super wide to capture all the action shots, or I'm going tight with the 50-140 and a 1.4 teleconverter, so there just isn't room in the kit for this. This is a great lens, and this is by far Fujifilm's most well thought out and built lens. From the tolerances to the fact that it's just amazingly sharp, and the fact that the micro contrast has to be some of the best in any system I've ever seen. This lens is something that if you need this lens, and this is a lens you feel like you can't live without, you will never regret purchasing it. But at the same time, I have to be honest with you, this is a lens that I wouldn't recommend for all the things that I mentioned. And most importantly, the price is just too goddamn high. Now, two things about this. If you buy this lens, I can tell this is going to be one that never loses its value. And at the same time, that means that whenever you start looking in about 6 months to a year for third-party purchases of this, unless you get a super sweet deal, it's not going to really be that much cheaper than buying brand new. Again, Fujifilm, I don't know what you did. This is one of the greatest lenses that I've ever used from a technical standpoint and a clinical standpoint. It's beautiful. Everything about it is great. The way it renders colors, micro contrast, the way that it's a low light beast, and the way that the bokeh in this is super duper pleasing and doesn't look sterile whatsoever. This is just a lens that I would not have in my kit because I feel like it wouldn't serve a specific purpose, and I'd feel more inclined to use it because of the money I spent than just because of how amazing of a lens it is. And when you start feeling like that, things can get pretty tricky. So the Fujifilm XF 50mm 1.0, an amazing lens, Fuji's greatest creation to date. It's fantastic. This with the XH2 that's coming up, I'm sure is going to knock everyone's socks off. But would I recommend it and would I buy it? The answers are no. Not because it's a bad lens, but because it's a horrible lens for someone like me. Thanks for understanding. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.